He stripped away everything she had, her dignity, her dreams, her future. But when she walked into his mansion wearing that maid's uniform, she carried with her a secret that would destroy him completely. Victoria Hamilton had once been Manhattan's golden girl, intelligent, ambitious, and breathtakingly beautiful, with cascading auburn hair and emerald eyes that could stop traffic. She graduated summa cum laude from Columbia Business School and had dreams of building her own empire. But that was before she met Alexander Sterling. Alexander Sterling was everything New York society worshipped. Devastatingly handsome with sharp blue eyes and a jawline that could cut glass, heir to a multi-billion-dollar tech fortune, and ruthlessly calculating in everything he did. At 32, he owned half of Manhattan's skyline and had never met a problem his money couldn't solve. Women threw themselves at his feet, but Alexander had always been selective, until he saw Victoria at a charity gala 3 years ago. She was different then, confident, radiant, working as a rising executive at a prestigious marketing firm. She wore a stunning black dress that night, her head held high as she commanded the room's attention during her presentation about digital innovation. Alexander was immediately captivated, not just by her beauty, but by her brilliance and fierce independence. Their whirlwind romance lasted 2 years. Alexander showered her with designer clothes, exotic vacations, and promises of forever. Victoria quit her job to support his political ambitions, hosting dinner parties and charity events, playing the perfect billionaire's girlfriend. She thought she was building a life with the man she loved. But Alexander had a different plan all along. When his business rival, Marcus Chun, threatened to expose some shady dealings in Alexander's overseas investments, Alexander needed a scapegoat, someone close enough to take the fall, someone expendable. Victoria, with her access to his files and her signature on several business documents, was perfect. The betrayal was swift and brutal. Alexander planted falsified evidence in Victoria's personal files, then tipped off federal investigators. Within weeks, Victoria found herself facing charges for embezzlement and fraud, crimes she never committed. Her assets were frozen, her reputation destroyed, and her former colleagues turned their backs on her. "I loved you," she whispered through tears during their final confrontation in his penthouse. "How could you do this to me?" Alexander straightened his tie with cold indifference. "Love is a luxury I can't afford, Victoria. Business is business." The legal battle drained what little money Victoria had left. Her court-appointed lawyer was overworked and underprepared against Alexander's team of high-powered attorneys. She lost everything: her apartment, her car, her savings, her future. The charges were eventually dropped due to insufficient evidence, but the damage was done. No respectable company would hire her, and she was drowning in legal debt. That's when Alexander made his final, cruel move. Through a shell company, he bought up all her debts and foreclosed on the tiny studio apartment she'd managed to rent with borrowed money. He owned her completely now, financially, legally, socially. Then came the offer that felt more like a death sentence: work as a live-in maid at his estate in the Hamptons for minimum wage, or face bankruptcy and homelessness. The contract was ironclad. She would clean his mansion, serve his guests, and be invisible unless spoken to. The ultimate humiliation for the woman who once stood beside him as an equal. "Think of it as paying your debts to society," Alexander had said with a smirk when she signed the papers with shaking hands. For 6 months, Victoria endured the humiliation. She scrubbed floors she once walked across in designer heels, served dinner to friends who used to compete for her attention, and wore a plain gray uniform instead of the couture gowns Alexander once bought her. Every day was designed to break her spirit, to remind her of how far she'd fallen. But Alexander underestimated Victoria Hamilton. While she cleaned his office, she memorized his passwords when he carelessly left his computer unlocked. While she served his business meetings, she listened to every conversation about offshore accounts, tax evasion schemes, and the very money laundering operation he'd framed her for. While she dusted his private study, she photographed documents with a burner phone she bought with her meager wages. Victoria wasn't just surviving, she was gathering evidence. Every piece of proof she needed to expose Alexander's real crimes, the ones he'd pinned on her. The irony was delicious. By forcing her to work in his home, he'd given her access to everything she needed to destroy him. But the real turning point came on a rainy Thursday evening. Alexander was hosting a dinner party for potential investors in his latest venture. Victoria was serving wine when she overheard him bragging to his guests about his brilliant strategy of framing his ex-girlfriend. "You should have seen her face when they arrested her," Alexander laughed, swirling his expensive scotch. "She actually thought I loved her. Women are so predictably naive." The other men laughed along, but Victoria's blood ran cold. Not from anger. She was beyond anger now, but from the crystal-clear realization that she held enough evidence to send Alexander to prison for the rest of his life. The next morning, Victoria requested a meeting with Alexander in his study. She stood before his massive mahogany desk in her gray Maid's uniform, but something had changed in her posture. Her spine was straight, her chin lifted, and those emerald eyes blazed with quiet fire. "I'm resigning," she said simply, placing a formal letter on his desk. Alexander barely looked up from his laptop. "You can't resign. You're under contract for another 6 months. Besides, where would you go? No one will hire you." Victoria smiled, the first genuine smile she'd worn in over a year. "Oh, I won't need another job. I'm starting my own business." "With what money?" Alexander scoffed. "With the money I'm about to make from selling my story to the FBI," Victoria replied calmly, "along with all the evidence I've collected over the past 6 months. The color drained from Alexander's face as Victoria pulled out a thick manila envelope and dropped it on his desk. Inside were photocopies of bank records, encrypted communications, and transaction logs that detailed every illegal operation Alexander had ever conducted. "You see, Alexander, you made one critical mistake. You assumed that making me your maid would break me. Instead, it gave me front row seats to your entire criminal enterprise. Every meeting you thought I was too beneath notice to hear. Every document you left carelessly around because the help doesn't matter. Every password you typed while I was dusting nearby." Alexander's hands trembled as he flipped through the documents. His whole empire was laid bare. The money laundering, the tax evasion, the bribery, the fraud he'd committed in multiple countries. "You can't prove any of this," he stammered. "I already have," Victoria said. "The FBI has had copies for a week. They're building their case as we speak. I'd say you have maybe 48 hours before they freeze all your assets and issue arrest warrants." Alexander Sterling was arrested 3 days later in front of his office building, cameras flashing as federal agents led him away in handcuffs. The story dominated headlines for months. Billionaires fall from grace, the maid who brought down a dynasty, justice served cold. Victoria's vindication was complete and public. Not only were all charges against her officially dismissed, but she also received a substantial reward from the FBI for her cooperation in bringing down one of the largest financial fraud cases in recent history. The evidence she gathered led to the recovery of over $200 million in stolen funds. But Victoria's ultimate victory wasn't just legal, it was personal. She used her reward money and the book deal from her best-selling memoir Invisible, How I Destroyed My Billionaire Ex on the Inside, to start her own consulting firm specializing in corporate fraud investigation. Within 2 years, her company was worth more than Alexander's had ever been. The final twist came during Alexander's sentencing hearing. Victoria sat in the front row of the courtroom, no longer wearing a maid's uniform, but a perfectly tailored power suit that cost more than Alexander's monthly prison commissary allowance. As the judge sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison, Victoria caught his "I won last time." She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply mouthed 2 words, "Thank you," because in trying to destroy her, Alexander Sterling had actually freed her to become everything she was meant to be. Not his victim, but a superior in every way that mattered. The mansion in the Hamptons was seized by federal authorities and eventually sold at auction. Victoria bought it for half its original value and turned it into a retreat center for women recovering from financial abuse. And sometimes late at night, she would walk to the halls where she once scrubbed floors and remember the woman who had worn that gray uniform with quiet dignity, gathering strength and evidence in equal measure. Never underestimate the power of someone who has nothing left to lose. Because sometimes when you strip away everything from a person, their money, their status, their pride, you also strip away their fear. And a fearless person with the truth on their side is the most dangerous opponent you will ever face. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad. It's getting even, getting rich, and getting the last laugh.